Hello, welcome to Sustainable Solutions with Planet Aid, the podcast that delves deep into the most pressing issues facing our planet and communities today. And now your host, Monica Johnson, Planet Aid's communication content specialist and podcast extraordinaire.
Thank you, and welcome to Sustainable Solutions with Planet Aid. I'm Monica Johnson, and I'm so happy to be your guide on this journey where we're going to be taking challenging situations and trying to simplify them. In this podcast, we're going to explore the critical challenges our world faces, from environmental issues to poverty, lack of education, and gender disparity, community development, agriculture, health, and wellness, and so much more. So we'll be shining a light on the incredible individuals and organizations that are at the forefront of developing and implementing sustainable solutions to these very issues. And together, we're going to take a deep dive into their stories and learn from their experiences and discover the innovative approaches that are making a real impact. So we want to say change is not only possible, but essential. And it begins with understanding, inspiration, and action. So join us every week as we embark on a journey of discovery, hope, and change. And please don't forget to like the episode and subscribe. So today's guest, we're going to be talking to Zaida Darley. Welcome to Sustainable Solutions with Planet Aid.
Thank you for having me.
So we wanted to just kind of jump in and ask you about your field of study. You're an environmental anthropologist. Why is this field of study important?
So first is environmental anthropology is actually like specializing in a certain segment of anthropology. Mm-hmm. And anthropology is the study of humans, just everything humans. So as complex as humans are, there's a lot. Like we don't all do the same thing because we each need to specialize in one segment, that especially if it interests us, we would be more passionate about it. So my focus is environmental anthropology. I have my degrees all in my bachelor's, master's, and PhD in anthropology. But my first two were focusing in archaeology, which is a subsection of anthropology, which is looking at the past. And I was studying water management in that aspect of it. So it's still an environmental issue, how people organize around water sources, how it changes the politics or even how they build cities differently because of water. And then for cultural anthropology, I had the opportunity to be part of an NSF funded, a couple of different NSF funded projects that looked at water use and wastewater, energy, and then eventually also food. So my focus has always been, and that's what cultural anthropology is, dealing with more of the present, but also considering like how the history of a culture may have, changed or influences the way that people look at the environment. So that is basically what, environmental anthropology is. Just my focus is more like how people perceive the environment, nature, and what are they willing to do to make changes, if they think they need to make changes. So that's what an environmental anthropologist is, which is more environmentally focused, people oriented.
You said a lot in that, and just focusing in on the fact that it is almost a study of human behavior as far as the environment goes, as far as our different practices and things like that. That's to simplify it just a little bit.
Sure. Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about how you got into your study there's an acronym that you explained to me called FEW, F-E-W. Tell us a little bit about that.
So that was my dissertation is on the FEW nexus. It represents food, energy, water nexus. So it's how these three resources interact with one another. And normally the environmental engineers will look at it and they'll quantify it. So that's not, anthropologists haven't really looked at that part of those interactions. And so I saw an opportunity to like jump in and see, well, how are people looking at it? How's an engineer looking at FEW nexus? How these three resources interact versus somebody, on the ground, trying to juggle between resources.
It kind of goes into the fact that you're now specializing in sustainability or sustainable housing. So tell me a little bit about that, because sustainable housing really is a global thing that you're really trying to look at different factors to understand how we can be more sustainable in neighborhoods.
Right. So before I went into getting my anthropology degree, I used to draw house plans. And one of the reasons I went to school was because, I saw that what I was drawing wasn't like people would want to build a home on a lake and they'd want to rip off all the grass on the edge, and that's like the area where the fish it's nurseries for fish. And I tried to have those conversations with them. It's like, yeah, but if you do that, you love this nice clean water, you're like messing this up, and they wanted what they wanted, and stuff. And then it's funny because then later on they'll come back and saying, this lake used to be really clean, and they don't put together how they were part of that problem. So I found that interesting. And I think that's what, kind of like I ended up going into archaeology, but how I kind of like slowly just went into that cultural anthropology part. And then also now that I'm done and I'm, I wanted to make an impact, I went into like this idea. It's like, well, let me use what I already knew, like even before I studied anthropology, and how to make a difference there with housing. Let
me ask you a question. How can the consumer be more knowledgeable about the area that they're trying to live in and the things that they're looking for in a housing development?
Right.
And especially if they have a desire to be, environment for touch.
So the great thing about a lot of the apps now, when you are searching for a home, is that they have like walkability scores. And that's a really good indicator of, how close are things, so that you can go like shopping without having to drive a car, or the transportation system may be better. One of the things that you can look into is getting, seeing if the house is LEED certified. The housing unit, which not many homes are. Not it is quite a challenge to get LEED certified. The building to be LEED certified, it needs to meet.
Can you tell us what that means, though?
So LEED certification allows the person who's developing the housing unit is able to say how what goes into the building, and also considers the design. So you'll see that mostly in commercial buildings. I've seen it more in commercial buildings than residential buildings, at least in Tampa. And so it considers like the well-being of people. Whether there's enough lighting, can they see outside? Are they going to have clean air? So the way that the unit is run, to be able to recycle air, that's being put into consideration. Are the green spaces? So when it comes to residential, when you're looking at things like that, it's like, is it well insulated? So you're not spending a lot of money on trying to heat or cool your home. Do you have, look, for us, it's because of the heat of Florida's energy efficient windows. There's also like hurricane impact windows, which I don't think that is really needed for LEED, but it's basically they're having to have this checklist, and they get graded basically on all the things. They don't have to have everything, but they have this combination of, things that they can do to show that the house is, or that structure is more sustainable built than a traditional structure. And one thing, the big thing to consider for, I know for Florida, is the materials, where they're coming from, because we don't have a lot of local materials. Like here, we actually have to ship in, concrete, which is what we mostly use because of the hurricanes. So those are things to consider. How far did that go? And so what is the environmental impact of those materials being used for the building? So that is one thing that people can look into, is whether the building is LEED certified. But I know in Tampa, I don't know of any that residential areas that meet that criteria or are willing to take that into account. So
Because it's a lot of money.
it is. And it's also planning. You have to, like, it's a new construction, you have to plan it. And also honestly, the policies, building departments would have to they do require some things, but they would have to require more things.
Okay.
Now, once it's built, though, you have to hope that you get a realtor that knows what to look for. So
Very good. And so let me ask you about, tell me the connections between, so you need energy and water, and why is the nexus between these three things important? How can communities use this knowledge to drive successful sustainability efforts? And I love just, I remember we had a conversation and you told me so much about just even having these things having to do with culture, because a lot of times even the culture of a neighborhood kind of affects that as well.
right. So I've done a lot of work, like I've St. Thomas, Belize, and even Southern California. It doesn't even have to be outside of the U.S. And so the way that they combine, the communities come around resources really affects how we can be sustainable, because they may define it differently, or they may just organize around it differently. So that's why it's not just a matter of numbers, because again, like the engineer could figure out a solution, but one of the complaints that we would hear from the engineers is like, okay, now make them use this. And actually what the engineer needed is that anthropologist to find out, okay, how is it that we can not make them use it, but maybe there's something that needs to be kind of tweaked in the solution to help them just take it on, like if it's, easy or natural. You think about like iPhones, that's why iPhones became so popular, was because it was kind of intuitive on how it was used. And so that it's basically trying to create solutions in that sense, like to consider the environment they're going into. So
Can you give us an example of maybe a culture that you found there might have been a problem in how people, like maybe the designers or would see a solution and then they would see the solution, how that might kind of clash?
Right. There was a small town in Belize that are a mix of, people from Belize and also expats from, other countries that would live in this tiny, like 700, it's only 700 people that lived in this town. However, a lot of these countries in the Caribbean, their income comes from tourism. And so one of the things that happens usually is if they have a deep port, it's that the cruise ships come in. So now you have this cruise ships. I don't know if people know, there's small like towns that are floating. And so you have 3,000 or more people in a cruise ship. And if you've ever looked at a dock, there's sometimes not one, like Tampa has one, it's one of the places that the people are actually leaving from. And there's times when I see 4 cruise ships, and you're talking about like 12,000 people that, that might just come into this very tiny island or, town, and just totally take over. And so if they don't have the infrastructure to be able to handle that fluctuation, and that's what was occurring, that they did not have a way to handle their wastewater and have enough clean water to be like, when they're at 700 and maybe bump up a couple thousand, that's fine. But when they wanted to increase the tourism, then they had to come in and then they had to rethink the infrastructure. And so Engineers Without Borders were coming in and making a suggestion saying we need to like upgrade the system. The problem was, though, that the way that they managed, and a lot of these countries, they have like groups of people that manage the water. So instead of like having your city water department, you almost have like a community water department.
Wow.
And that was the issue there. And the community, that department or that community group, not only took care of water, but they also took care of the needs of people. Like if they saw that the people needed like a new basketball court so that the kids from the community can go play, that money they paid in to pay for water. Also, part of it went to help with community projects. So when you're having now this big, global entity coming in and saying, you need to fix this. And now they're having to restructure how they pay for water, who's managing it. Now you've just taken away a community group that did more than just manage water. They also helped the community. So that's where you have to like kind of step back and say, wait, how can we do this better? And I don't know if they came up with a solution to that because I ended up moving to a different project. But, I think something would have been along the lines of, like have let the that community group somehow still support that community group. So then that way they can still continue to support the community when it's only 700 people, even though they're considering like outsiders. Basically, they're trying to manage the infrastructure for people that don't live there all the time.
So is that something that usually happens? They come in and they kind of bogart it a little bit?
Yeah, fortunately, yeah. So that's why, but the good thing is that, anthropologists are starting to speak up over the years. They've said, hey, you could do it better. And companies are responding to it, like where you see Google and Meta, they're hiring anthropologists because they want to know, like, how can we do things better? So they are hiring people in those positions because they know that they need that extra, just input. It's not always quantitative. It's also the qualitative part of it that, the storytelling to find out if they're going the right direction.
Right. So what are some of the challenges and opportunities for communities that were not planned as sustainable communities, but now they want to go in that direction? They want to become more sustainable.
I think that that's actually the best. That's when it comes to sustainable communities, that's what I'm most interested in because I live in an old house. I've always loved old houses. So I always thought it was funny when people went into this whole tiny house kick and they're like building tiny houses. But it was like, no, I live in a tiny house. It was built in the 50s because your starter house was a tiny house. And so I think that it's like saving those older homes. So I think that people that, even though depending on the age of the community, it's going to be different, because of course the infrastructure or even, how people feel about buildings. I think I feel that way because growing up in Florida, I've noticed that they've used old buildings as though they're disposable rather than a part of our history versus like in the Northeast, I see these amazing houses. They're like over 100 years old. And it's like, why can't we have that here? Yeah. I think that's where we need to go. I think we need to not throw out, just like you guys have the Planet 8 has the yellow bins to take on, take the clothes that people do not want. And that way you're saving carbon, you're saving water. You're not just tossing it out, but you're actually reusing it. I think we need to do the same thing with buildings. We need to save the buildings because that's material that used up, energy and used up water, and stuff. So like for you to just tumble it down and just build new, I don't think it's not, sometimes you have to do that because there's no way to rescue the house. And I hate when that happens, but but I think those are materials that you've already invested energy and water, and they should not just be easily tossed away. So I'm very passionate about like trying to figure out how to maybe be a change in Tampa where, like they're actually keeping the houses intact, and keeping communities intact.
Now, is it more expensive to tear it down or to keep it?
It depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So I think right now there is a need for rentals and there's a need for starter homes. And so something like like with my house where it was just a matter of like refurbishing it, it's just, it needed some tweaks and fixes. And it's fine. It's great to continue that, starter home. From what I'm reading from planners, they are explaining that a lot of policies in cities are where you might as well tear that tiny house down because you can build a bigger house and they can get more tax money. So that it might be it's political versus, is it really more sustainable?
So let me ask you a question. What would you say is the key to making a house sustainable? What would be the factors in making it sustainable? Would it be to make tighten up on making sure that the water is working the way it should be working? Is it the maybe solar power or whatever? Tell me what will make it more sustainable in and I guess it depends on whatever neighborhood you're living in as well.
Right. So I would check to see if the electric company sometimes offers energy audits. And so that's some place that I would start, is to try to find an energy audit, and they will check. They will see if you have a good seal on your doors, if you have good seals on your windows, so you're not having air, that air coming in or out, depending on the environment you're in. If you have enough insulation. I know I was in a community that was zoned at the time as a low income community. So I was able to get some insulation in some areas that I was needing for free. So there are programs out there to try to help, especially low income areas, to try to help them become more energy efficient. So you're not spending that time leaking toilets. That is a big thing. Sometimes exchanging toilets. Sometimes the state has programs to actually change the toilet to a low flush toilet. I know with solar, it's a little tricky. I know I don't know why Florida doesn't have more solar, other than because it's on the roof. There's always this kind of fight between, with hurricanes and, like how intact your roof can stay because there's solar panels, so that's like a debate. And I think that might be a matter of, how's that information being communicated, so that's, the kind of things that I've been trying to get into now that I'm in real estate. So then that way I could share that information with potential clients.
And also just with that housing community, we want to talk about the food, the sustainability aspect of the food within the community, because it all works together. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I work with some anthropologists that are really into community gardens. And so that has been, again, that's also another thing where you think community garden is that you have a neighborhood and you have a garden in it. And so that's a community garden. But what they have been finding out that some people that are not even part of that neighborhood will come in to help in that community garden. So it kind of changes the definition of community. Is it the garden that makes a community, or the neighborhood that's in it that makes that community a community garden? But that is, I think, a really important aspect. I think I noticed houses, again, the tiny houses are being torn down, and now you have large houses with hardly any lot in them. And I grew up, kind of tinkering around farming. It doesn't have to be anything major, but I've always grown food, and I've seen my parents grow food and my grandparents grow food. So I think that idea of either a community garden or people just getting more into gardening in itself, it has to be a trend. I don't see it. I see that it's building up here in Tampa, but when I went to Sacramento, there was one every other block. You could see a community garden everywhere when you drive around. And it's actually really nice. When you're driving around, you see this garden. I don't know, it puts a smile on my face. But, I think it's better than just having a parking lot, So I think there is a need to start growing just for resiliency, especially with COVID, they became, gardening became a big thing. And I think it just needs to continue just so that, you could take care of maybe the people that are in need.
Is that a trend that's been more popular in certain areas, in certain generations? What is it? Are more young people getting into it, or more older people getting into it? What's the case with that?
Right. I think it is the younger people, because it is it's hard work. It's physical work. So it's not something, but I know that at the University of South Florida, they have their botanical gardens. There's an area where the students could like rent out their own little like square and grow their own food, and it's a great for mental health, to get out there and you just see things grow, and so I think it depends on it is a cultural thing. Like Florida, it's hot. And our growing season is different than for up north. So like in the summer, we don't do very much because it's just very hot and it's very wet. So we're usually more harvesting than we are like actually actively growing. Where if you're like in Ohio, this is your active growing season, they're going to farm everything until like the frosts come in, like we don't have that issue, kind of on the inverse of what the rest of the US may experience. So I think that we need to, get back to gardening, but I think it is that idea of like, how do you acclimate to this area, especially when we're having such new people from, other states coming down. They have to learn this is how we do it in Florida. So I think it is very much, again, a cultural thing to get over a challenge.
So just asking you to put your environmental anthropologist hat on. If you envision building a sustainable community from scratch, what is that going to look like?
I think that's a great question because I've always thought about I've always tinkered with that idea. But I think in taking lessons of what I've learned is that I would start with just having a great team of people. Like one person doesn't have to have all the answers, but having that team, and also bringing in the people that would live in that community. So then that way, I think that would be the best way to grow or to build a sustainable community. I think there's been too much top down and it's failed. It hasn't, not completely failed, but it's not working at its best. And so I think that if I had the opportunity, money was no object or anything like that, I would just hire, have a great team and then, have the people that are going to live there, have their input into building sustainable. So it may mean more gardens or less gardens, more parks. I know that dog parks are really big here. So.
Okay. And so in addition to everything else, you are a realtor.
Yeah.
So tell me a bit about what are some of the sustainability trends that you're seeing and that are impacting the real estate industry?
Right. So I think the main switch that we have seen is with COVID is that we need now office space. And so it used to be very open house plans where everybody can see one another. And now we're seeing this trend towards you need at least one little area, private area, because you need to do these interviews, or talk, online with somebody. So, or work from home. So I think that is something we have noticed. The shift is that how the way that what may have worked 5 years ago is not exactly. There has to be something kind of in between. They still like the open areas, but still having that privacy issue. The good thing now with technology is that you have a lot of smart products. So you have the ability to actually put in light bulbs, and have an app to control, when your air conditioner comes on, when the lights come on, so I think with technology, it's made it a lot easier to be sustainable. There is, with any sustainability effort, there's usually a upfront cost, you have to invest a little bit of money. And then, you start to see your own habits, you could actually see your own behavior as to how long you're not doing something or not, leaving a light on when you didn't need to. And it's oh, now with this app, I can just turn it off. So,
you know what? I really do love that because it makes you think about the fact that in sustainability, it really is about your own stewardship as well.
Yes.
So there's a point in this that it's not just about, well, tell me what to do. You learn what you're supposed to do along the way and try to figure out better practices for yourself.
Right. And practice, I think that's the key word, is a practice, because even though I know this information as an environmental anthropologist, it's not like I do everything I'm supposed to do, because I still have to break bad habits. So then that, having technology to help you break those bad habits are great, but it's also just being aware of your habits, and which ones you need to change. And it's a practice. You just improve over time.
So I know that in my research, I saw that you consider yourself a Jedi.
Yes.
Justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Tell me a little bit about that. And how does it guide your work? Why is it important to sustainability?
Oh, so first, yes, it is very important. It starts with me. I am a white Hispanic woman. And so for me, like, I was just saw the Barbie movie, and I was just like, yes, for me, Barbie was like this blonde, blue-eyed person that I could not identify with. And yet, and I was always in search for Courtney, which was not pronounced, like nobody said anything about Courtney, but Courtney had dark hair and dark, brown eyes.
Just so you know, I loved Christy. Christy was the other one.
Right.
Our doll.
Right.
My sister and I.
Yes. We ended up with a Christy because we couldn't get a Courtney. But, it's like that, it's such a silly, like, if you think it's such a small thing, but growing up, I know that I was looking for that baby doll that looked like me, and I could not find it. It was always blonde, blue-eyed, so personally, that's something that has, like, I understand that representation matters. And that, every time there's like, and there's a Puerto Rican in the Supreme Court, we're like, woohoo, we've made it, so that's a big deal. So I believe, I want to be a Jedi where I understand how this, being able to be included into, decision making and, just being represented, like visually represented in anything, whether it's movies or in politics, where you see, your politicians are looking a little more like you. Not that everyone needs to look one way or the other, but it's just, it means that their experiences, that my experience is being represented. So being, and that's part of, I think, as an environmental anthropologist, I don't see sustainability is about taking care of people first. So you need to be able to represent all people. And so that's why, I may not do it always well, but I try my best to be a Jedi. That's why I call myself more of a Padawan, because I'm just always learning. It's a practice.
Very good. I love the Star Wars.
Yeah, right.
Representation.
Just a couple of things that stood out to me during that conversation. I just want to kind of tread back over a little bit. Your discussion of culture and the sort of lack of effectiveness of that top-down approach is really resonates with what Planet Aid does. All of our development programs, we really rely on locally led organizations that we provide the funds to, and we really think about more empowering communities to reach their potential rather than sort of dictating some solution for them. So I'm just wondering if you can think of an example where a sustainability effort either did really well or failed spectacularly because they failed to consider the local culture and the community that they were trying to maybe develop this project in.
I know that in one project that I was doing, kind of in a smaller scale, they were trying to have more in the area. They were trying to get people to use hydroponics, which is basically or aquaponics, actually, where you have a fish tank providing the fertilizer and also a protein source, and then that gets pumped into a hydroponic system, so it fertilizes the vegetables that goes through the system. And the idea is that it's a closed system, so you're going to save water. The biologists and the engineers that were involved were basically saying, well, people need more education. They just need to understand this better, which it's true. Like, I don't think that everyone understands the system or how it works. But what ended up what we ended up finding out and working with this, I got involved and I started looking at their questions, and it's like, well, let's rephrase these questions, because I think you're just basically acknowledging what you think needs to be done. And so when we rephrased the questions and we started getting more feedback from people, they were saying, no, we YouTube this information. We know it, we know what we need to do. The issue is that it is very labor intensive. Like if anyone's owned a fish tank, they know that, having a fish tank is labor intensive. You have to have somebody there to make sure the fish are fed and not always the tank works well, So there were things that they basically had to go back to the drawing board and say, if people want to use this aquaponics system and you're trying to maybe bypass more of the human behavior, then this is the human behavior you're dealing with. It wasn't a matter of education, which seems to be the default in a lot of, with scientists, and stuff. It's like, oh, let's just educate them. No, it's a matter of when we tried to do this is what went wrong. And this is why it was great. I love the system, but I don't want to it's like a child, and I don't want to dedicate that much time to it, and stuff like that. So that's when, that was an aha moment for the engineers. And it was like, oh, okay, so now we need to go back to the drawing board and let's rethink, what can we do to make this easier? And so they're still in the process of trying to make, because it's a great source. It works great with developing communities to have a aquaponic system so they can have a protein source, a rather inexpensive protein source. So that's why they were trying to improve the system.
Just a great example of how valuable it is to listen. I think it sounds like they came in with some assumptions, and really, once they listened to the community, they were able to be more effective in terms of identifying what the choke point was or what the speed bump was.
Right.
And then just lastly, we can end here. I just wondering if you could talk a little bit, and maybe the hydroponics is a good example of innovation in the areas of food sustainability, energy sustainability, water sustainability. Where are you seeing some really promising innovation in those areas in terms of sustainable living and sustainable housing, sustainable communities?
I am a hobby farmer, so I think it is going to be about the food systems. They have to be more compact, and they're trying to make it easier. But I do tend to get on my social media, those advertisements pop up about how do you compost indoors, and stuff like that. But then as an anthropologist, I keep thinking it's yeah, but that's not, I don't think you understand what composting is. So, where did you get this info? So I do think that there is and this is a need that we even heard from students when I was a sustainability outreach coordinator, is that they were in their dorms and they wanted to they wanted to live sustainably. So they wanted to have their garden, but they wanted to also compost. So our worm composters, a good solution and stuff like that. So I think our food, even though I don't see as much of the community gardens, which would be more of a community level of gardening, I do see or hear that people do want to garden within their household in some way, even if they are in an apartment. So I think that's where I'm seeing more of the innovation, how people are able to do that. Maybe they don't have the right lighting. There's, special lighting. And now that they know what color of LED lights, you can use to help grow, So I'm really excited about how there's no limitation. You don't have to have vast amounts of land. And I think that with the way we're growing and kind of spreading out and there's less farmland, I think that's the way that we're going to have to start thinking. It's kind of more compact.
So one of the grants we just wrote was for a local Maryland organization, and it's for a program where they put together sort of a garden in a bucket. And the idea is that, families can take this home and they can garden anywhere on their, even if they just have a little porch or something like that,
right.
A balcony in an apartment.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting that we're sort of orienting around that same thing about how can we have locally sourced produce without huge tracts of farmland.
Right.
So very promising area that we're supporting with funding. and in other ways as well.
That sounds great.
And you know what I was thinking is that a lot of times people think that sustainability has to be some huge effort, but
Right.
it can really be a little grassroots effort that you start up. And I know for one thing, on campuses, zero waste is a big thing. So even
Yes.
just setting out containers that say this over here, this over there, and this over there for, composting or for trash or for this or that. So just even those small efforts, they end up being big things.
Yes. And I know with our university, they even have times when they weigh how much waste so that people can see, like, this is the impact that we're making, and how much of it can be offset, and it's also said, like, why isn't it being composted, and rather than being tossed into the landfill? Because with working with the engineers, they wanted to reframe this idea of waste. And I agree, like, that's not waste. That's actually something that can be decomposed and can be nutrients to fertilize plants, and I think we need to stop thinking along those lines. We need to reframe the way we think.
Just like used clothes and shoes.
Exactly.
Used to make that circular economy, much like the enclosed farming system with hydroponics.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate all the information that you gave us, and really look forward to maybe you coming back and telling us a little bit more. We did a small dive today, but maybe we'll do a little deeper dive in that.
Sure. That sounds like fun.
Okay. Well, and again, thank you for joining us on this episode of Sustainable Solutions with Planet Aid. We hope you've been inspired by the ideas we've explored today, and we encourage you to search for sustainable solutions that you can pursue as well. Be a good steward in your neck of the woods and beyond. Haley?
Thank you, Monica. A few reminders for our listeners on the way out. If you want to stay connected with us, stay informed of the latest sustainable solutions, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. Please share with your friends, family, colleagues, subscribe, share. Together we can make a difference. And remember, change starts with awareness and action. So let's keep the conversation going. Feel free to reach out to us on social media or through the website, planetaid.org. We're at Planet Aid on most social networks. So share your thoughts, and we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, remember, it's a big world out there, but every small change counts, and together we can build a better world together. All right, thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.